We okay there? There we go, okay. So I'm going to talk about one entrepreneur's adventure, okay? I'm one entrepreneur. Everybody gets their own adventure. And I like to talk about the idea that each of us is the hero of our own adventure. So I want each of you to think of this as that, how am I going to be the hero of my own adventure? Now, when we come to Silicon Valley, a lot of people think I'm coming here to become rich, I'm going to become famous, I'm going to change the world. Well, those are great, but I've been here for almost 40 years, and during that 40 years, everybody has that goal, or some of those goals, and they don't always come out. You don't have control over how that's going to end. But you do have control over one thing, and that's your own adventure. So I came here with a sense of adventure, how I was going to have my adventure, and what I was going to do, but I didn't know what it was going to be. So let's go on a little bit of adventure with me. So here are some key themes I have today. With a little ringing down there, can you drop it down a little bit? There we go, that's better. Is that better for everybody? Okay, thank you. Okay, so here's some key themes I want to talk about. Here are the skills an entrepreneur needs to be successful. And if I were Steve Jobs, I'd say, let's get this down to just 3. So, and I work with Steve Jobs, so I don't want to do that ever again, but it's another story. We'll talk about that later. I'm a friend of Woz's. So curiosity, perseverance, and resilience. Those are key soft skills that will add to the value of every hard skill you ever gain in your entire life. And that's what my speech today is going to be about, okay? Part of the adventure. So here are some of the companies I was co-founder of. I've co-founded 10 companies. I was advisor to a number of others. I've been very fortunate over my 40 years in Silicon Valley. From a guy from Akron, Ohio, that I've done a lot. So let's go through these briefly. I'll talk about 2 of these in more detail later. So first, a little propeller head. Back in the early days of the internet, actually before the internet, 1991, we founded a software startup to basically explore opportunities for patented software technologies. And we explored interactive television. We explored, in fact, we have a patent in that area, interactive television. We explored interactive software. We explored gaming, streaming media, high-frequency trading. It turns out one of our patents or technologies is part of high-frequency trading. Didn't find out till litigation ensued later, but that's another story. But we had a lot of fun. We developed a technology that eventually became part of Cobalt Card, that blue thing there. It's a platform for stored value payment systems, the first ever issued on both Visa and American Express. I did another startup called iPrevail. My other company was acquired, and I was working in patent litigation because I did a lot of patent work, and so a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, would you like to come and assist me in patent litigation work? I don't have a law degree. But what we ended up doing is working with expert witnesses, designing software, patented software. We're dealing with depositions in large litigation cases. 9/11 had some problems with iPrevail, but we won't go into that today. Ripcord. A friend of mine had a problem where people were eavesdropping on his phone calls. And we discovered that voice over IP can be hacked. Gosh, I think the NSA does that, don't they? But we had a technology back in 1997 for basically encrypting voice over IP and interactive media for that. Surge Optics, a friend of mine had cancer. We'll talk about that in more detail. I don't like blood. In fact, the first time I was sitting in a classroom at the age of 12 and they showed a film about Hemo the Magnificent, which is about blood, I passed out, literally. They had to drag me out of the hallway. So Kirk and blood do not get along well. But Surge Optics does surgical imaging of cancer using near-infrared light in biology. We do not use X-rays, radiation, high-energy fields. We'll talk about that. And then finally, mileME. I was audited a few years ago. And I discovered that when the auditors sit you down, they want to look at your mileage records first. And so I said, we got to find a software solution for this. So I started using technologies for doing that. And mileME was the answer to that. So basically, we'll get into that later. But basically what we do is we don't use GPS to do your location for tracking your miles. It's hand-free mileage logging. Everywhere I go, my cell phone basically checks out what I'm doing, logs my miles for me, so I have my tax records or my reimbursement records. So let's get started on one of these. Oh. Adventure. Okay. The key to the adventure is having this gene. It's called DRD4, dopamine receptor D4. You can read about that later. I discovered I had it about 20-some years ago. Okay? And I looked around me and discovered my father had it, and I discovered at least one, if not both of my grandfathers have it, and now I discovered I have a son who's of a certain age. He has it too, and my daughter has it. It's amazing. It's really interesting. DRD4 basically says it's called the novelty gene. And a part of novelty is the willingness to basically go out and do something new. By the way, am I right over here? You guys okay over there? Okay, all right. So that's one thing. It's in your genes. Someone said, oh, it's in your genes. Yeah, it's in your genes, right? That's how it works. Now, parents, all parents here, just be quiet for a second. We always talk about plans for the future. You notice how the plans always look like this. You know, they're going from lower right to upper left, right? We all know this, or upper right. So plans don't really work out this way. I don't care what you say. Plans look like this when they're implemented, okay? It's non-linear. You know, you have these things called good adventures and bad adventures, okay? Do you learn from your bad adventures? That's the key lesson in life. Good adventures, you learn something. Bad adventures, you darn well better learn something because you don't want to do that again. So part of my aspect of talking about planning, I'll talk about that in more detail, but you see why your plans have to be able to take the bad side of things because that will happen when you least expect it. Now, notice when I talked about curiosity, perseverance, and resilience, I didn't talk about luck. You can't control luck. You can't do anything about luck. I'll move over to this side. I'll block these guys over here. You can see the rest of this. So it turns out luck for me was 1/50th of a second. 1/50th of a second, the reason I'm standing here today. I was riding my bicycle to class at Kent State University in Ohio. This is shortly after the shootings. I'm riding down the road and some lady does a sudden left turn in front of me. I'm going very fast. I don't have time to react. I leap up out of the bike, roll over the top of the car, come down the other side, do a spin, come back up on my feet. I'm in one piece. Okay? She was doing 25, I was doing 23. It would have been a bad collision. A 50th of a second, I would have basically not been able to get out of that. I would have run into her. I would look like my bicycle, which was a Schwinn Varsity, which was made out of steel, which looked like a pretzel after the collision. Because of that accident, and some money saved later, I was able to have $1,000 to help me move to San Francisco about 3 years later. If it had not been for that, who knows what would have happened to me. I was very lucky. So people say, are you lucky? Of course I'm darn lucky. So, okay, another part of adventure. Find a great example. How many here know who Ernest Shackleton is? Okay? Everybody should know about Ernest Shackleton. Now, Ernest Shackleton was supposedly an Antarctic explorer. He never made it to the South Pole. He's a failure, right? Come on, he's an explorer. He's supposed to go to the South Pole. He's going to Antarctica. He never made it. His ship got trapped in the sea ice 100 miles, 150 miles offshore. It got crushed, okay? They ended up with little bits of rowboats like this, basically rescue boats. They ended up sailing across the Southern Ocean. Everybody got out alive. That is the guy you'll follow to the ends of the earth. And I use this example because a great entrepreneur is somebody not just themselves is smart, not just themselves is capable and resilient and all this. You have a team of people who basically all join you. Whether you're the leader or you're the follower, it doesn't matter. I've typically been the COO, Chief Operating Officer. I'm not the leader. But believe me, when you find people who basically do that, you follow that person. You learn how to do that. So read about Shackleton. By the way, this is his centennial, 100th anniversary of 1914. He did this. It's a great book. There's a great TV show that came out by BBC. So goals and plans. Let's talk about goals and plans. So Kirk is 14. Kirk is a hot shot with a slide rule. Kirk wants to be an aerodynamic engineer. Wow, right? So I didn't want to just draw helicopters. I wanted to design them. I started with airfoils. I was learning about how airfoils work. I was teaching myself calculus, trigonometry, and advanced algebra to figure out how helicopters fly. So I'm going to the library, picking out these books, riding the bus back and forth, riding my bike. And, well, of course, you start learning about how helicopters work. You learn interesting things. Everything's interconnected. You got the eclectic, you got the cyclic, you got the pedals, you got the power, you got all these things going on. A change in any one item changes the performance of the entire aircraft. What do you think entrepreneur is? You change one factor in your business, all these other factors change. What are you going to do? How's it going to affect itself? So part of what I was doing, learning how to optimize things with my slide rule and a piece of paper and a pen, well, pencil in those days. I was learning how to do that. It's the same skills that today I use when doing spreadsheets for startups. So if you get into flying, the next thing that happens, or sorry, if you get into helicopters, the next thing you want to do is learn how to fly. You got it here? Oh, there we go. Oh, we're good. So when I was 15, I got a job working at the airport. Now, I wasn't quite as bad off as Andrew. I feel very fortunate. So I was able to bicycle a couple miles from my house to the airport where I got a job cleaning the bottoms of airplanes with a nasty chemical called MEK, methyl ethyl ketone. So for 2 days, 8 hours each day, I'd see another planes cleaning off the exhaust, dreaming about that 1 hour of flying time I would get with an instructor. So by the end of about 10 months or so, I'd finally have about 10 hours of flying time. But I soloed. And when I soloed, good things started to happen. Very good things. I was really excited. I'm getting to fly across the state of Ohio, 125 miles out. Mind you, I'm riding my bicycle to the airport, flying across the strait, flying back again, and going by bicycle, okay? I didn't have a driver's license. I was 16, but why bother with a driver's license? I was having more fun flying. So So one day I'm sitting at the airport and these guys in the hangar, old guys, they were smoking away because everybody knows they smoke. He said, hey, fat stuff. He said, I hear you want to be a Naval Aviator and aerodynamic engineer. So take off your glasses and read that sign over there. And I said, what sign is that? Well, it turns out I have really bad eyesight. I mean, I can see about this far, okay? So you don't get to be in the military as a pilot. You don't get to be in the civilians as a pilot. You don't get to be anything other than you get to buy your own gasoline as a pilot. So there went that career. There went some other things, okay? In fact, what happened shortly thereafter, this is 1969, a wonderful thing happened. People landed on the moon. This is really cool. Except that all my neighbors who are aerospace engineers got laid off. And they say, well, kid, you really want another career. And sure enough, for about the next 7 years, most of my neighbors were still unemployed or underemployed back in Ohio. These are very formative years when you're 14, 15, 16 years old. So for the most part, I had to find a different career choice and a lot of other things. Now, mind you, my parents wanted me to go to school at Kent State University because it was 8 miles up on the road. It was their alma mater because they were teachers. I wanted to go to MIT or UCLA. They said, well, if you go to UCLA, you'll never come back home. I said, well, yeah. So, which is true. And I want to go to MIT, but they said, oh, I don't want to go to MIT. It's too, anyways, something like that. So, okay, so let's get back into the hard stuff here. So, part of being an adventurer is there's a point you have to burn your boats. And for me, the biggest challenge with growing up was that I knew from a very early age that I wanted to get out of Ohio. I would do anything it took to get out of Ohio. At that time, I grew up in the Rust Belt. Everybody was losing their jobs. It's kind of like the Great Recession, only it was worse because it was very localized in California, or in Ohio. Rubber factories are closing down, car factories are closing down, steel factories are closing down. Everybody was walking around depressed. It was a pretty seriously bad pain. It's not as bad as losing your country. I mean, we had it pretty easy by comparison. But still, it was pretty depressing. And I was a smart enough kid, and I wanted to get out. But the challenge was that how to get out? Well, by fortuitous set of circumstances, remember that bicycle and that $1,000 I'd had? So I had a summer internship, I learned some skills when I was in college, and as a result of that, I saved up some money and said, great, I'm not going to go back to college, I'm going to get out of Dodge, or out of Akron in this case. So married my girlfriend, a year later we basically saved up our money. We arrived in September of 1975 in a wonderful place called San Francisco, just as the personal computer was being invented. Oh, am I lucky. It's a great time to arrive here. But we had to burn our boats. When we arrived in California, I'd sent out cards to 400 possible employers, and I got well, I got 4 responses to be true. I got 396 sent me nothing back with little bingo cards because I'd enclosed what's called a self-addressed stamped envelope, send it back. I got 4 responses. 3 said, don't come here, okay? We don't need you. 1 said, come and talk to us, but we don't really want you to come here anyway. So we arrived in San Francisco. We had no jobs. We had $1,000. We had an old rusty Vega, which if you don't know what a Vega is, that's a good thing. And I learned very quickly that if I wanted to work and stay in San Francisco, rather than go back to Ohio, okay, that I would do anything to do it. And I had to learn how to sell. So I learned how to sell my services as a freelance photographer. And my first client was a wonderful company called American Microsystems. Now the reason why Apple IIs are built upon 6502s was because of American Microsystem and a co-founder of mine whose name was Dan Sokol, who was a test engineer from AMI, and he had little boxes of parts that failed the test. And at the second Homebrew Computer Club in 1974, he gave that box of parts to Steve Wozniak, and those became Apple IIs, or Apple Zeros, I should say. And Dan was one of my co-founders. He was working at AMI at the same time. So I say burn your boats. Sometimes you got to do it. You got to have options, option A, option B, option Z. But sometimes you have to say, I will do whatever it takes not to go back. Okay? And that was my situation. So my parents said, great, Kirk, you're doing really well. You're a freelance photographer. You're doing film. You're doing marketing projects. Why don't you get a job with a real company? And I said, well, I'd love to get a job with a real company. So one of my clients was a company called Fourfaced Systems. They were a spin out from Intel, and they actually made mini computers all the way from chips to software. And by coincidence, they needed a marketing guy. So they hired me as a marketing guy. Cool. Big company, 4,200 employees. Kirk is set for life, right? Parents are proud of you, you know. Father-in-law is proud of you. It's a good thing. So just so happens about a year later, this guy came along and, oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Sometimes it's slow. I don't know what it is. Yeah, like PC versus Mac. Anyway, I'm a Mac guy. What do you know? So Motorola acquired Fourfaced. My parents are really proud. It's a much bigger company, 120,000 employees. It's a wonderful thing, right? Wrong. Fourfaced had 4,200 employees the day we were acquired. A year and a half later, we had 700 employees. Now, the good news, I kept getting promoted. I was a lower-level marketing dweeb. I then became a marketing manager. I became a senior marketing manager. I started writing speeches for the senior executives at Fourfaced, senior executives at Motorola. It became a real good skill set of mine. It's still the adventure. So, now what happens is that Fourfaced is going into trouble, Motorola is going into trouble, they're going to lay me off. I negotiate a deal. And at this point, I managed to negotiate a deal where I would go under contract as part of my adventure to come back and work for them, but I can work for Apple, I can work for Sun, I can work for Intel, I can work for other tech firms like Sprint. And sure enough, within 2 years, I'm writing speeches for the CEO of Sun, the senior executives at Intel, and the senior executives at Apple all at the same time. It was a good deal, wasn't it? We get lucky every now and then. So let me talk about how we do startups. I use some of these because we say, you know, curiosity, observer, whatever. Let's get into some specifics here. Oh, I thought the clock was going the other direction. I have to speak faster. All right, so startups, I talked about that. Let's talk a little bit about Cobalt Card. So back in 1998, 38 million teenagers ages 13 to 22 wanted to buy stuff online. And the problem was that they had to use mom and dad's credit card, which mom and dad don't like. But they had their own money. And so we created a platform called Cobalt Card, which is a stored value payment platform. By the way, we had a deal with MTV, which is why it looks like that. We had a marketing deal with MTV. But we were the first card ever issued on both Visa and American Express. And we had an exit from American Express just in time for the stock market to collapse. I have really good luck there. Anyway, and then we eventually were acquired by First Data. But I'd like to talk about this in my remaining time. So Surge Optics, a friend of mine had cancer. Turned out that 40% of breast cancer patients, actually it turns out 2 friends of mine had cancer, 40% of breast cancer patients need a second procedure because positive margins are left behind. Surgeons can't distinguish good tissue from bad. So by coincidence, I'm walking around the track and one of my neighbors, her husband is one of the top molecular biologists on the planet, except he only worked with mice. Did a lot of mice, killed a lot of mice as we say in the day. So he was working with a team that was trying to get this to work in humans. So the concept is very simple. What we do is we take a molecular biomarker, we conjugate with the fluorophore, we inject it in the patient as a systemic, we then image the patient with a near-infrared light, which is what this guy is. It's basically a camera looking at the tissue in real time. This is what the eyeball sees, this is what the surgeon sees. Those green things are cancer, okay? We can see it half the size of a human hair, down to about 20 microns. Do it in real time, 30 frames per second video. It works in humans. The only problem was we brought it on the market about the time that the venture capital community was going south. This is 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. So it was a pretty bad time to bring it to market. The good news, it worked. In fact, let me show you. Those of you who are squeamish, don't look at this. I'm used to watching blood nowadays. And I think it'll play. Well, if it doesn't play. Okay, so we actually have a real play? Oh, good. Sorry about that. I'm running out of time. Again, okay. So key thing is this. These little green spots over here, that's the cancer in real time. During the procedure, we can actually see the cancer as the surgeon is working. If the video is playing, we can see that. You can look at it online. So the technology is called Surge Optics, and I'll go to this. So at the end of the day, we came out with a value proposition. We were going to reduce the number of repeat procedures from 40%. We demonstrated down to 4 to 6%. 35% reduction in overall. We'd save $3,500 per patient in surgical procedures. Anybody who here has had cancer knows that you don't want to have a second procedure. We know as surgeons you don't want to have a second procedure because it diminishes your confidence as a surgeon. You want to feel very confident in your capacities to do this. So Surge Optics is right now being advanced through clinical trials in Europe, in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, all the US operations had to shut down because we couldn't raise money in the US. And at the moment, I don't know how the Europeans are doing because their economy isn't doing well either. So summarize here. Curiosity, perseverance, and resilience. I've always been curious, and I think it's a key thing about all those industries I've worked with. By the way, I'm a college dropout. How did I do all this? Now, if I had been able to go to MIT, imagine what I could have done. But I always point out I'm a college dropout. I didn't want to be a college dropout. I mean, it was economic college dropout. Things were really bad in Ohio. It was a really challenge. My parents wouldn't let me borrow money for college, okay? They would not sign for the loan. And when I was 17, 18, 19, they wouldn't do that. In Ohio, under the law, we had to do it that way. It's very frustrating. But I always say is that You have to find your own adventure. And part of the reason I talk about this stuff to students is that you may have great opportunities. You may not have great opportunities. But it still is part of your adventure. Find something that inspires you, as other people talk about today. If you find something that inspires you, it's really easy to do that. But the key aspects is that you have to persevere through those down times. You have to go when you ever go nonlinear, that gets way down here in the bad adventure, find a way to get through it. And be resilient, because you never know what's going to happen next. And that is one entrepreneur's adventure. Have your own, okay?